welcome, be seated.
Good morning. Today's New Testament comes to us from Hebrews 4, verses 14 to 16. Jesus, the great high priest. Since then, we have a great high priest who had passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's always great to assume the stool here at Great Valley. Did you know that rabbis, when they had something significant to say, would sit down? And sitting down was done to alert the audience that a 2-hour sermon was on its way. Now, they did that to indicate that something important was about to be spoken. That's why Jesus, for example, in some of his major sermons would sit down before he would speak. Well, I wish I could make that same claim, but the dirty truth is that I sit down because I feel more secure and comfortable sitting down and speaking. So I hope this in some ways is meaningful for you. It is a privilege for me. What do the following people have in common? Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, Martin Luther King, John Lennon, Virginia Woolf, Francis Schaeffer, King David. They were all checkered people, tragic heroes. Steve Jobs, the brilliant founder of Apple Computers, was a raging tyrant towards his fellow employees. Henry Ford, the inventor of the automobile, which changed history, and a faithful Baptist, was also a raging anti-Semite. Hitler, it is said, hung a portrait of Henry Ford in his office. Martin Luther King gave his life for the dignity of the oppressed and the mistreated and marginalized at the cost of his own life, but he was also habitually unfaithful to his wife. John Lennon, the brains behind the Beatles, arguably the greatest rock band of all time, an incredible musician, had the tragic track record of beating the women in his life. Virginia Woolf, an exceptionally gifted author whose novels remain to the present day heralded, also held the poor in contempt and was opposed to teaching poor children how to read. Francis Schaeffer, near and dear to my heart and many of us, the founder of L'Abri, who helped countless people come to Christ, was also allegedly physically abusive to his wife, Edith. King David, a man after God's own heart, was also, as we know, an adulterer and a murderer. They were checkered people. They blessed the world and sometimes cursed those closest to them. They were public successes and often private failures. They often got one thing right, but other things wrong, sometimes terribly wrong. Eli, the priest, was one such man. He was both priestly and pathetic. We come across his story in the book of 1 Samuel. Let me tell you a little bit about him. First, some background. Hannah was but one of the wives of a man that she loved dearly, but unlike the other wives, she could not conceive a child and was ridiculed and humiliated because of it. She was in a state of grief and humiliation when this next passage begins. Her story and the story of Eli begin in 1 Samuel 1, and it goes like this. Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on a seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Hannah, being greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow, and she said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and will not forget your maidservant, but will give me a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Now it came about, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. And he said to her, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you." Pretty pathetic of Eli. Not a good start. He doesn't seem to have great emotional intelligence. He jumps to the false conclusion that Hannah was drunk, and he only adds to her misery. But Hannah replies this, "No, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation." And then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant your petition." How incredibly priestly of Eli. Having taken the time to step back and listen to her and hear her cry and her pain, Eli blesses Hannah, responding with empathy. And as time goes on, God answers Hannah's prayer and Eli's petition, and she gives birth to a baby boy named Samuel. 1 Samuel 1 tells it like this. Now, when she had weaned him, that is Samuel, she, Hannah, took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and a measure of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was young. And then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord," and he worshiped the Lord there. Eli receives this little boy Samuel, and we're told that Samuel, quote, "ministered to the Lord before Eli the priest." How incredibly priestly of Eli. He adopts and raises this little boy. He receives and mentors Samuel. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 2, we learn that the religious administration of Eli was marked by corruption, because Eli was cowardly. You see, he was unwilling to remove his 2 sons from their office as priestly servants. All the while, they used their office habitually to indulge themselves both sexually and to enrich themselves materially. How cowardly of Eli. How terribly pathetic. And amidst the ongoing corruption, one night, while laying down to sleep, Samuel hears his name being called on 2 occasions. Samuel enters Eli's quarters on both occasions, assuming it was Eli who was calling him, and he asked Eli what he wanted. After this happened a second time, in 1 Samuel 3, we read, "The Lord called Samuel again for the 3rd time. And he rose and went to Eli, and he said, 'Here I am, you called me.' And then Eli, discerning that the Lord was calling the boy, said to Samuel, 'Go lie down, and if he calls you again, say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and then the Lord came and stood and called out as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." How priestly of Eli. I mean, Eli, for all of his warts, teaches the young man that would arguably become Israel's greatest prophet how to hear and how to respond to the very voice of God. What an unlikely candidate. But unfortunately, that word that Samuel received from God was not a pleasant one to deliver. His first sermon was incredibly painful. It was a word of judgment that Samuel had to tell the very man who had taken him in, who had mentored him, who had fed him, and who had taught him how to hear and respond to the voice of God. He had to tell them that he and his household were under judgment for their corruption and cowardice, and that their end was near. Now listen to this. Eli responds this way. Then Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." You get the sense that Samuel is reluctant. He said, "What is the word that God spoke to you? Please don't hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And Eli said this, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." In response, Eli doesn't get angry. He doesn't become defensive. He humbles himself, and he surrenders to God's decree, even at the cost of his own life. How incredibly priestly of Eli. Eli, a tragic hero, a messy masterpiece. Now, Graham Smith, for those of you that don't recognize that name, which is probably everybody, he was a Canadian swimmer who swam for the University of California back in the 1970s. He was an NCAA champion in the 100 and 200-yard breaststroke. That was no surprise. The guy was incredible. However, he also swam the 200 individual medley at the NCAA championships. That's 2 lengths of butterfly, 2 lengths of backstroke, 2 lengths of breaststroke, 2 lengths of freestyle. And I remember watching the race, and here's how it went. Butterfly, Graham was 1 full body length behind the field. Backstroke, Graham was 3 body lengths behind the field and out of the race. Breaststroke, his specialty, Graham was 2 body lengths ahead of the field. Freestyle, he hacked and clawed his way to the end, and he lost 2 body lengths and ended up winning by 1/10 of a second. And I sat there and I thought, we were laughing, my teammates and I. It seemed ridiculous. It seemed unfair. It seemed almost criminal. How could somebody who's so bad 3/4 of the time be allowed to win? I mean, how could someone who was horrible 3 of the 4 strokes emerge victorious? And I was thinking about that. It kind of occurred to me that Graham Smith was to the individual medley what Eli was to the priesthood, and by extension to the life of faith. He probably got more wrong than he got right, but what he got right was critical. Graham Smith was a messy, schizophrenic individual medley swimmer who accomplished something amazing. Eli was a messy, schizophrenic priest through whom God did amazing things. Eli was the broken brush that God would use to paint his masterpiece called Samuel. So I don't know about you this morning, where you're at, what you think of yourself, but schizophrenia and messiness is a pretty good description of my relationship with Christ. My guess is that if we're ruthlessly honest and relatively circumspect, the same would be true for many of us. Now, when we look at that beautiful mess that characterizes lives like Eli, we tend to respond one of 2 ways. Some of us really don't like it. We dislike Eli. He makes us uncomfortable. We don't like messes. We like things clean and pristine and categorical and tidy. We like good versus bad. We don't know what to do with good people doing bad things and bad people doing good things. It's hard to keep track of. We like holy versus sinful. We don't know what to do with holy sinners. We like hero versus villains. We don't like villainous heroes. We like pristine priests, not part-time pathetic priests. Eli just won't cooperate. He won't fit into our categories. But for others of us, well, we kind of love Eli. I mean, he encourages us. He gives us hope. Why? Because, frankly, we are Eli. We live Eli every single day. We can be priestly for sure. We give our tithes. We read our Bibles. We pray our prayers. We attend our religious events. We go on mission trips. All good and important things. However, in spite of our priestly experiences, we know that deep down we can be just as pathetic as Eli was at times. We know that more often than not that we're unwilling to inconvenience ourselves for other people. We know that we live with a low-grade anger that can erupt at home or at work or behind the wheel of a car without much provocation. We know that we cannot seem to stop ourselves from lingering too long over provocative pictures on the internet. We know that our atheist neighbor, if we're honest, is much more loving and far less self-centered than we are. We know that when we feel threatened, we gossip about those who threaten us as a way of protecting ourselves. We know that we engage in office politics, sometimes ruthlessly, because we fear what will happen if we don't. We know that we're profoundly insecure, which means that we're pathologically competitive, creating and protecting pristine images through a variety of means. That's why we love Eli. Because we know deep down that we're not even remotely a fully devoted follower of Jesus. That Eli gives us hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, God could even use haphazardly and imperfectly devoted followers of Jesus also. And so now we arrive at the so what question. What practical difference should Eli make? Well, for some of us, it might mean that we need to embrace our inner Eli. Don't lock Eli away, like the Fratelli family did with their youngest son, Sloth, in the movie The Goonies, keeping him chained in the basement. Keep Eli out of sight. No. Invite Eli to the dinner table. Bring Eli to the light. That is, find 2 or 3 trusted Christian friends. Solicit their prayers and ask them for permission to tell the truth about yourself. The unvarnished, even unspiritual if necessary. The good, the bad, and the ugly of our lives. James tells us to confess our sins to one another and pray for each other that we may be healed. Confession, bringing to the light, precedes conversion and restoration. I mean, image maintenance may be the habit of most of us suburbanites, particularly those of us here that are affiliated with the main line and beyond, right? Image is everything. But image maintenance only leaves us lonely and spiritually calcified. Be honest about Eli. Entrust your image to the image of God. For others of us, Eli might mean something very different. Now, we've got this whole let me be honest about my inner Eli thing down, okay? We're right there, no problem. We have no problem admitting that our relationship with Christ can at times be more pathetic than priestly. Got that, no problem. The problem for us is that we use it to disqualify ourselves from doing good, for doing ministry, for serving others, for speaking up. Remember, God's greatest masterpieces are painted with severely broken brushes. So you're sitting there, you're thinking, well, that's a nice thought, that's not really doing it for me, Greg. Well, remember this, try this. If anything, admitting that you or I are a hypocrite and a schizophrenic believer will not disqualify us from ministry in a postmodern world. Just the opposite. It will give us the necessary street cred to be effective. Postmoderns do not listen or engage with saints. They love hanging out with sinners. Even sinners with a great story to tell. God does far more through brokenness and weakness and poverty than he does through moral or theological power. So finally, I'll conclude with this. If your parents, take comfort from Eli. Many of us are parents. Some of us that are not will be. How do you figure this out? Same parent, wildly different offspring. 2 predatory, corrupt sons, and then a 3rd adopted son who became one of the greatest prophets in all of human history. Same parent, very different children. Go figure. A friend of mine, John King, was the Young Life Area Director working with high school kids for countless years in Delaware County. And during that time, John, who saw just about everything one can see when it comes to kids and families, He was watching a Young Life kid from a very chaotic and very spiritually disinterested home. He was watching him flourish in every way. At the same time, he knew of another Young Life kid who came from a loving, spiritually attentive home as he was involved in self-destructive behavior. And John said this offhandedly, though it stuck with me. He said, you know what? Having kids is like rolling dice on the grace of God. As believing parents, if we learn nothing else from Eli, it's this. We can do everything right, and that's no guarantee that our kids are going to turn out well. Now, we hate that, right? We'd like to have final control over that, right? But we don't. Conversely, we can do everything wrong, and it's no guarantee that our kid won't flourish in spite of us. In other words, Eli reminds us parents not to take too much credit if or when our kids flourish, and not to take too much blame if or when our kids struggle. Same parent, different offspring. And I realize that thought can be upsetting to those whose loving and spiritually attentive parents, whose kids are on a heavenly trajectory. But I also know that thought can be profoundly comforting to those loving and spiritually attentive parents whose kids are battling unforeseen demons. Eli, the patron saint of us struggling believers. Let's pray. Lord, I'm so glad, I'm so grateful that there are Elis in the Bible. He got it right sometimes, he got it terribly wrong other times, and yet you did amazing things through him. You're just that kind of God. I don't know why you're that way, but I'm so glad you are. And I think I speak for many of us in saying so. So we just simply want to say thank you this morning, for your grace is bigger than all of our faults. In the name of Jesus, who is our only hope, we pray. Amen.
Let's stand and close our time with worship.